Hello YouTube. I'd like to continue my exploration of the UFO secrets of Central Asia because we have interesting confirmation from the Soviet times, and although most of the information is still secretive and basically out of bounds for researchers, we did find out quite a lot about UFO battles, encounters and sightings in that very turbulent part of the world. In November of 2005, Colonel, who is now retired, Alexander Akimenkov, was one of the speakers at the annual Russian UFO conference, Zikilevskaya Chтения. The former test pilot presented a very detailed lecture about his experiences with the UFO encounters during Soviet testing of new weapons in the Asian regions of the USSR. He recalled that the year of 1968, when stratosphere balloons were entering Soviet territory from Iran, it was a very significant one in a way. The Soviet pilots flew in as a group. They were working together, and he described that the balloons, the stratosphere balloons, were carried by an airstream into the Soviet Union, and at the same altitude, a number of them, and discarded their ballasts, gained another altitude, entered another stream, and returned to Iran. There, the reconnaissance data was collected and analyzed. So the Soviet MiG-17 regiment was stationed at the Kizil Arvat airfield in the Soviet Turkmenistan. MiG-17 in those years did not fly at the altitude of 15,000 meters. Akimenkov at the time was in this town of Mari. He and two other aviators were ordered to shoot down one such stratosphere balloon. Akimenkov's aircraft weapons consisted of 32 unguided rockets. His colleagues had guided rockets of various types. The difficulty of the task before them was the hydrogen that filled those balloons. If the hydrogen exploded, they would be doomed. So their goal, the Soviet aircraft pilot's goal, was to shoot down the capsule. They were flying towards one evening towards their goal with the sun behind them. They noticed the gray stratosphere balloon at the altitude of approximately 18,000 meters. Akimenkov noticed to the left of the balloon another object shaped like an automobile tire, similar to the balloon in size, but its color was blue, but not glossy, rather it was like a foggy blue. The test pilot was concerned with the evasion of the burning hydrogen and did not perceive that it was a UFO. His full attention was on the capsule, so he did not look at the UFO when he opened fire. Akimenkov hit the capsule and the balloon immediately jumped up. The test pilot turned his aircraft around to see the results of his firing and saw that the UFO flew away to a distance of 10 kilometers. But before, it was from 300 to 500 meters away from the balloon. That is very close. And he still doesn't know what that object was. Akimenkov also recalled an incident that took place during the testing of cruise missiles. For some reasons, one of the missiles, instead of flying eastward, flew westward and landed in the Krasnodar region. The missiles were accompanied by Soviet Su-24 aircraft. The missiles were small, so the airplanes would fly 4 to 5 meters behind the nozzle. Otherwise, if the cruise missile turns around, it is easy to lose it. This was very interesting. Now, the Amba River is in western Kazakhstan. It rises in the Mugodjar Hills. We'll talk about them later. And it flows 640 kilometers southwest into the Caspian Sea. Akimenkov and his crew accompanied the missile toward Amba, and because it was very late, decided not to return to their base. In the morning, they had to come back to complete their mission. At 5 in the morning, they were awakened as the aircraft technicians were dispatched to service the airplanes. One of them ran into the cafeteria, very excited, and asked if anybody had a camera to film the UFO. They ran to the aircraft parking area, 2 kilometers from the town, and indeed observed something like a cistern hovering above. It was not very high above the ground, about 300 meters, and its diameter was 10 to 15 meters. The color of the UFO was blue with a tinge. Amazed pilots gathered around their Su-24 aircraft, took pictures of the object. Sometime later, this object started vibrating and vanished instantaneously. Later, the films were confiscated from the pilots, of course, by the KGB, as it was the procedure in the armed forces. But Akimenkov mentioned that in the early 1980s, there was a change at the top command, and the pilots did not have to sign the non-disclosure statement anymore. A lot of things happened in the early 1980s. You can see it, this in my videos with UFOs and USOs research in the Soviet Union. But let's get back to Central Asia. There was another very significant incident, but earlier, in 1976, that shook up the Soviet military command. It took place in Kazakhstan, in the area of Mugadjar Hills, the same as before. It's a series of mountain ranges in the northwestern Kazakhstan, about 275 miles long. They are considered to be continuation of the Ural Mountains and are connected with southern Ural by certain hills. They actually form the divide between the Caspian Sea and Aral Sea. Very interesting sightings took place in the area. But right now I want to get back to the 1976 case. The location was the Amba Air Defense and Anti-Missile Weapons Testing Range. A huge disc measuring 500 meters in diameter appeared during the testing of the new missiles. The commanding general ordered open fire, and anti-ballistic missile was launched at the UFO. It was blown up by a ray from the huge unidentified object. The insubordinate general, as a result, was punished. The Soviet Minister of Defense issued a ban on such demonstrations on firepower and mentioned the previous ban that was obviously not obeyed. After 1978, by the way, the Soviet military became more efficient when it came to UFO observations and data collection. So, the order not to shoot at UFOs was disobeyed one last time, as far as we know. In the summer of 1981, during the Afghan war, there was a very interesting case. In August of that year, a gigantic UFO appeared over the Air Defense Regiment of the Soviet 12th Army of the Air Defense Forces. The area is close to the Iranian border, in the Turkmen town of Kizil Arvat, which we already mentioned. Today its name is Serdar. It is located northwest of the capital, Ashgabat, on the road to the Caspian Sea. The Soviets were vigilant and nervous because Saddam Hussein's forces were fighting the Iranian Ayatollah's armies. The strange elliptical object hovered at an altitude of 7 kilometers. 2 MiG-27 jets were dispatched after it. The UFO slowly and noiselessly moved in the direction of the north. The radar registered it without any problem. The captain who flew the leading interceptor told his ground control that he had the UFO in sight. An order from the ground control ordered him to fire 2 missiles at the target. The UFO disappeared at a great speed, but it was not alone. The leading interceptor and the missiles fired vanished instantly. No traces of the airplane or its missiles were ever found on the ground. Another confirmation of this incident mentions that the UFO was sighted at the altitude of 7 kilometers. It was shaped like a cigar, its size approximately 100 to 200 meters. A special commission investigated the incident. It confirmed all facts in the report prepared by the regiment's commander. As a result, he was demoted because he issued orders without asking his superiors. The commission did not accept his argument that the sighting took place so close to the Iranian border, was like about 100 kilometers. The Soviets knew better than to fire at UFOs, because this was no longer 1976. This time, the Setka instruction was enforced by the nation's armed forces, and in my previous videos, which I urge you to see so you understand the history of the Soviet UFO research, quite different from the United States. The Setka program was the one that the government issued special program, military/academic, to study UFOs, and its findings, for all we know, based on very little information available, are fascinating. But going back to Central Asia, let's go to the year of 1980. Very interesting case took place when the raiders of the local aircraft regiment detected an unknown object, and 2 fighter planes were dispatched after it. They were piloted by Soviet aircraft officers Gamarnik and Moskalenko. They made 2 rounds, but did not see the target visually. 3 days, the regiment pilots fruitlessly chased the target. It was detected and appeared on the screens of radars, but that's all. Hundreds of runs were logged, several aircraft gun sights were changed, as well as some radar equipment. An inquiry was sent to Moscow to find out whether some new secret equipment was being tested. After the regiment commander realized that they had encountered something unexplainable, the flights to engage the target were terminated. But the amazement did not end there. The blip that indicated that ghostly target on radar screen was transformed into a thick dot. The dot raced up at incredible speed and disappeared, proving that it was a UFO, not some commonplace technical interference. In 1981, there was a very interesting case of the second sun, and this was reported by Alexei Valentinovich Smirnov, an engineer and former Soviet military officer who served at the time of the incident at the testing range of the Soviet anti-aircraft defense forces. The date was July 26, 1981. The time was 5:10 a.m. That morning, Smirnov woke up and was filled with a sense of dread. He was to observe missile launches later the same morning. He approached an open window. In the pre-dawn sky, he observed 2 suns. One was the usual and the other a sinister red sphere. The engineer decided that what he saw was an optical phenomenon and did not take a second look. Soon thereafter, he and 50 more officers were in the meeting area before leaving for the testing range. At the same time, the crimson sphere, flying at incredible speed, approached them from the south, hovered over their heads for 5 seconds, and then turned around and disappeared in the easterly direction. Soviet engineers were shocked. They knew perfectly well that such a maneuver at the given velocity and altitude was impossible according to terrestrial physics. No human being would survive such turns and the overloads involved. No terrestrial flying craft would be able to fly in such manner. Later, while discussing the incident, Soviet officers recalled strong, baseless fear that they all experienced at the time. Now, Smirnov lived in Kiev when he was interviewed. years ago. And there was another witness to this who lived nearby, and she could attest to this story, according to the former engineer. She was one of the town's residents and wife of the Soviet officer who went to the hospital because of the stress caused by UFO. The townspeople quietly discussed this incident. They all knew about secret orders that forced the unit commanders to report and collect all information about UFOs, documented in special forms and sent to designated military unit in Moscow. This was according to the Setka requirements. For Smirnov's colleagues, such orders were quite timely. They had interesting reports to send up to the Setka program. The airspace over the testing range was divided into sectors. Each sector was observed by a special radio telescope that registered all flights, details of launch missiles, and thus the visiting UFOs were photographed frequently. Reports about UFOs were sent to the appropriate place. Smirnov recalled at least 20 such reports. The Central Asia is a fascinating area because we know dozens of reports, but hundreds were unreported. And outside of the recent developments with UFOs, there are ancient mysteries that are still buried in the sands of the Central Asian deserts. And sometimes they come up and I show them in my videos. Please see my videos and please subscribe to my channel. And I'll tell you more about other fascinating areas of Eurasia and ancient aliens, UFOs and USOs. Thank you.